Hey you guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we're talking about the top baits that we rely on for catching bass in the month of April. Let's kick this thing off by talking about bass fishing in April. Forget the baits for a minute. Let's talk bass fishing because believe it or not, this is the most difficult top 5 baits video for me to do all year. The reason why is that in April there are so many different things going on that you can catch fish a ton of different ways. It's amazing for the angler, but it's very difficult to narrow down just a few baits. So what I've done is I've narrowed it down to some of my key baits, the baits that I know for a fact will be on the deck of my boat every time I go out. The reason why it's so hard, again, is that the bite's wide open. Depending on where you are in the country, if you're way in the south, okay, mostly post-spawn for you, might still be a wave of fish coming on the spawn. But most guys, the whole middle of the country, April is the month where the bulk of spawning takes place. It's possible that you've got some fish that are already done too, depending on exactly where you live. There's some post spawners, but the bulk of your fish will spawn this month. And there are a few stragglers that might even hold out into May. Now guys way up north, different scenario, right? You're coming into hardcore pre-spawn going to spawn. Your fish, if you're really far north, a lot of those fish will spawn in May. But regardless, no matter where you are, this is a time when the bite just opens up. You can build confidence throwing almost anything. You pick out a technique, you pick out a bait, you commit to it, you're going to catch fish, which again, from a let's narrow it down standpoint, can make things tough. So today what we're looking at is some of the key little details that make a huge difference in my fishing this time of year, because I will target pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn fish this month. I'll fish for all of them. Let's start out with the slow moving baits, okay? Because I've got 2 there, and really, I did better than normal. This top 5 is really a top 7. Sometimes it's a top 25. I'm doing pretty good this time. But I've got 2 slow moving presentations for you because there are days where I will get up shallow and just pick it apart. There's days where either fish aren't reacting or you know, maybe we've gotten around to one of the bigger moon phases and there's a lot of fish spawning and you really have to just slow down. Even if you're not sight fishing, you have to slow down and pick the cover apart, even in muddy water, to catch fish. But the bulk of the time I'm still power fishing. All right, let's jump into the actual baits. Bait number 1 is about as simple as you're going to find. It is a Senko. This is the month that a 5-inch Senko, basic 5-inch Senko, will be on my deck every single day. If I could only have one Senko for the rest of my life, it would be a 5-inch green pumpkin black flake. That one right there. That thing smashes. I can wacky rig it on light line when the water is clear. I can upsize, throw it on a 3/0 Gamakatsu super line hook when the water gets murky. You can fish it on a weighted wacky hook. There's so many different things you can do with it, but it's just an incredibly effective bait. But one thing I do this month, and I've talked about this before, I will talk about it again. I personally have an incredible amount of confidence if a bait has blue flake in it in the spring. And to me, it's a little bit more bluegill-esque. That's what I tell myself. I had a little blue flake in there, it gets a little bit of that blue flash, they're thinking bluegill, they smash it. I don't know if that's true or not, but what I do know is I smash fish on soft baits that have a little bit of blue flake in them. I don't know if you can even see the moon dust in that, but if I get it down where it's not getting completely lit up, the blue is just glowing in this bait. I'll link this exact color for you because I have a ton of confidence in that guy in the springtime. But adding a little bit of blue to your soft bait is huge. The Senko smashes. Again, I could skip under docks. I can throw it on stump fields. I can send it here on the Tennessee River. These fish get so shallow. I can send that Senko so far back in the shallows, and I don't have to worry about it getting hung up. It's just a very effective way to fish. It's not fancy, but it works. Number 2 is going to be a jig. We got 2 of them here for you. This time of year, it's hard for me to pick between a shaky head and a jig, but I've got a trick, and again, we've talked about it before, but let's talk jigs. If I could only have one jig year round, every lake, everywhere in the country, all year long, it would be a Dirty Jigs pitch-in jig, 1/2 ounce, go-to color, okay? That guy right there, it's no different in the month of April. If I can only have one, that's the one that's coming. It's always tied on. The big difference during this month is that I throw a Green Pumpkin blue flake trailer on it. Green Pumpkin blue. That blue, I'm telling you, it's the deal. Now, the other jig that I throw is a finesse cut jig. Smaller package, totally downsized. I can go to much lighter line. And then again, I've got a pack a chunk on here. It's the tilapia color. It's full of blue flake. I'm telling you, it's a huge confidence thing for me. The deal with the finesse jig is that I throw a finesse jig in place of a shaky head. So anywhere that I would throw a shaky, up against a stump, up against a dock piling, going down a bluff wall, anywhere that I might be throwing that thing, I can replace that with a finesse jig. I tend to catch all the same fish, but I feel like when I cross paths with a giant, my odds of that giant committing to a jig are higher than committing to the worm. So I feel like it just gives me that extra boost of confidence. I'm more likely to get a monster on the jig over a shaky head. So for me, the 1-2 punch is a Senko if I want the worm, and the jig otherwise. For a lot of people, it'll be a Senko and a shaky head, but I'm telling you, that little finesse jig, that's a big deal. Now from here on, I'm power fishing. I love to power fish. Next bait up is going to be some version of a spinnerbait. Depending on where you live, you've probably got shad in your lake. Not everybody, but most people have shad around. The shad will spawn in most of the country somewhere in late April. But again, it just has to do with water temperature. As your water temperatures break into the low 60s, those shad will begin to spawn in the mornings. Even in lakes that don't have shad, the same bite seems to take place. Just bait fish in general seem to go shallow in the mornings, post-spawn. Bass will move onto those places, hard structures. So shallow points, long tapering points, shell bars, hard bottom, bass tend to pull up on them and eat bait fish. In lakes that have shad, where a shad spawn will go on, that goes to the extreme. There's tons of fish doing it, and there's big ones doing it. But that is where the spinnerbait really becomes a player for me. I love to throw a chatterbait all spring. I'll throw a chatterbait most of the year. But there's a window here where a spinnerbait completely blows out a chatterbait for me. I love to throw a spinnerbait during the shad spawn. I throw 2 different styles. The biggest thing you can see here is a size difference. Okay, these are both 1/2 ounce, but completely different sizes. This Mega Bass, very small frame, very small blades. It doesn't even require a trailer because it has these 4 longer strands hanging in the back, and they move really well underwater, so you don't even need a trailer on that one. And I rarely put a trailer hook because it's so small they just eat it whole. But if I've got clearer conditions, so this technique works whether you've got clear water or muddy water, but the clearer the water, the more I feel the need to downsize my spinnerbait. And I typically go a lot faster as well. I don't want them looking at it. So these small blades allow the spinnerbait to sink faster, and I can burn it a lot quicker. So I can really scream this thing through the water in clear water. When that water gets a little murkier, I tend to go to more of a full-size spinnerbait. This is a Nichols Pulsator. One thing about this specific spinnerbait, can you see the flash coming off of this blade? It's insane. We had some underwater video where we were comparing spinnerbaits, and these blades were flashing in the water so bright that it was hitting the surface and then reflecting back down to the camera. It was amazing how bright they are, and that has a lot of drawing power when these fish are up, they're aggressive, they're looking for shad to chase. A spinnerbait that's throwing all that light, full size, a lot of commotion, will really pull them. Now, I say full size, this is still not a giant spinnerbait, right? These aren't huge blades. I don't throw a lot of those really big bladed spinnerbaits. A full size frame like this is about as big as I go most of the time. But a spinnerbait will be a key player, especially for me, especially in the latter part of the month. Next one is a square bill. And the square bill is getting to be a funny category. Tim and I were talking about this the other day. It is possible that a year from now, I will do an in-depth, I think it's too late in the year now, but I think I may do a full-blown in-depth square bill video. And what I mean is to the tune of the swim bait videos we do. Like full in-depth, all the baits, understanding movements, sounds, body shapes, depths. The reason why is that the square bill category has exploded with amazing baits. There's so many good square bills that if I go pull my square bill boxes to talk to you guys about a square bill, I can't even grab all the baits that I really, really like. There's too many of them. There's so many good options, and the differences that I use them for are so minute. I think the day is coming that we really go down that rabbit hole together. But the main thing I want to talk to you about today with the square bill is two things. It's not really even size driven for me. It's about sound and about depth. In April, a lot of bass are going to be really shallow. Really, really shallow. They push up around cover. They like to spawn shallow unless the water's crystal. And when they are shallow, they like to be up against something. The problem with that is that if you're throwing baits up there, it's easy to get hung up. And if you go up in those shallows to get a bait out, you can blow the fish out of an entire cove back, right? There might be 20 bass back there, but you go in there to get a bait that's stuck, all the fish come out. So I try to focus on baits that are really, really weedless or snagless. So with my square bills, I grabbed 3 here to talk about. First one is the biggie. This is a loud, obnoxious bait that I have so much confidence in. I've caught so many big bass on a biggie over the years. River to sea biggie, it's the Papa size, it's the larger one. I just have a ton of confidence in that bait's ability to fish shallow, to come through cover, and to call fish. It's got the right combination of vibration and sound. And I've caught giants all over the country. I mean, I've caught them in Tennessee, I've caught them in Texas, I've caught them in California, and I've caught them everywhere in between. It's just a bait that I have a ton of confidence in. But the two, I mean, you guys already know what are in my next 2 hands if you've been paying attention to our videos this year. This guy, the Rocco, part of the OG series, Aughts Garage Baits. The Rocco, unlike the other Aughts Garage Baits, the first 2 are flat sides. This is a full-bodied square bill. This bait is remarkable. If this is the first time you're hearing about it, somehow you need to pay attention. The Rocco has the most incredible startup speed of any square bill I've used. So how do I explain that to you? If you throw up against a piece of cover and you go to wind out of there, there's going to be a slight lag time where the bait just doesn't look right before it starts to get its action. Where it's really key to me is I like to burn and pause my baits. I don't just steady retrieve. I like to burn, stop, pause, rip, right? I like to work them. The faster a bait will start up, the more aggressive I can get with how I work the bait. And the Rocco, it's a balsa bait, it's silent. It has the most remarkable startup speed of any bait I've ever felt. So where one square bill will feel like this, The Rocco's like this. Super tight action, super fast start. It's like the difference between a jackhammer chatterbait and the cheapest knockoff chatterbait you can get. One, you throw it out there and the second you engage the reel, that jackhammer's working. It's perfect. The other one, you throw it out there, you go to pull it, the blade's not working, you gotta rip it. Okay, it's kind of working now. That difference is critical if you're going to start and stop a bait. So in the square bill category, I've never found a bait that will start up as fast as a Rocco. And that allows me, instead of like burn, 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 pause, burn, 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 pause. Now I can like half turn, pause, half turn, pause, burn, burn, pause, half turn, pause, rip it. Completely different retrieves that I'm not able to do with most baits. That's an awesome bait. And then the last one, the Bill Lewis ATVs. Now this is the 1.0. I throw the 1.5 a lot too, but the 1.0 will go even shallower. This bait is insanely snagless. I fell in love with this bait earlier this spring. I've caught so many fish on it. I mean, I have flat worn these things out, worn the bills off them on the Tennessee River because they're so snagless. I can throw them through laydowns, and I don't mean crawl them and creep them through laydowns. I'm talking throw it in the laydown, burn, 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 and it's just hunting and diving through the branches. It's incredible how snagless it is. So snagless that my initial reaction was, okay, that's gonna be fishless too. If you can go through an entire tree and not hook a branch, the fish are gonna bounce off that, but they don't. The hookup ratio is great. It's another bait that I'm very, very impressed with. So it'll go shallow, it's got great movement, incredibly snagless. It's got a good, subtle sound. I don't know if you can hear it. It's definitely in between a silent and a biggie. Okay, but a really good sound. I have so much confidence in it. I mean, I've lost track, not of how many fish I've caught on it, of how many good days I've had on it this spring. That's how much time I've put into the ATV. But again, a square bill as a whole should be a major factor all the way through summer. Next one is the Lipless. The Lipless is a different deal. I just talked about baits that will keep you from getting snagged in the shallows. The Lipless is obviously a bait that will get snagged up, but they're too effective to not talk about. You want two different versions of Lipless, depending on where you live. When I'm fishing grass flats, really shallow water, say I was on the California Delta, or I'm in the backwater on Chickamauga, or I'm down in the south, I'm down in Florida where everything's grassed out, and I want to burn over the top of that stuff. You want a traditional style Lipless, something like a rattle trap, that you can just burn over the top of that grass. These baits sink fairly slowly for their size, and it's easy to burn them. Now, if you're on a highland reservoir, this next bait, this is a Jackal TN70. I'll come back to the highland reservoir thing. A Jackal TN70 falls extremely quickly for its size. This is a bait that we like to hop bottom with. You guys know the retrieve. We work them on bottom like an aggressive jig and the fish just club them. It's been working all spring. It will continue to work until the grass in your lake gets so bad that you just can't do it anymore. And then in the fall, when the grass starts to die back, this bite will return. But if you are on a highland reservoir where your banks are steeper, you don't have a lot of grass, maybe the only grass you have is in the back of a couple of pockets, but you still like to throw a Lipless. One lake that comes to mind for me was Lake Berryessa. I used to spend a lot of time on Berryessa. I would straight retrieve these baits because they sink so quickly. They're more effective in a steep walled lake. I could fish the narrows post spawn. The bass would pull out to the color line and those bass would suspend in 10 to 30 feet of water. Well, they'd be in deep water, but they'd be 10 to 30 feet down in the water column. And I could throw a Jackal TN70 or a Lucky Craft LV500, two baits that are small, compact, and they sink quick. And I could use it as a straight retrieve Lipless, but I could do it in 20 feet of water. And I would catch giants post spawn when other people were not doing that. And I'm sure I just hurt somebody's feelings by talking about that, but it's incredibly effective. The last category is the paddle tail swim bait. Giant category, right? These are both paddle tail swim baits. I'm gonna talk about all the above, but I don't want you to hear swim bait and glaze over because you're picturing this. But if you're a big bait guy, I don't want you to see this and glaze over because both are incredibly effective. Probably the /1 way that I like to rig a smaller paddle tail this time of year is on a flashy swimmer. That's an owner flashy swimmer. That's a 5/0 on a 4.8 Kitech. Go to a smaller one for the smaller swimmer. But those are baits that just catch them. I mean, they just catch fish. Slow, steady, straight retrieve with that blade turning. It's like a more finessey spinnerbait with that little blade under there, but it's rigged weedless. So I can skip it under docks on lakes that have a lot of docks. I can throw it back on grass flats on lakes that are full of grass. And I can slow bump it through heavy cover on the shoreline of a highland reservoir. You can do anything with it. They're really, really effective. And I just choose the right size hook for the right size paddle tail. Now at the other end of the spectrum, you got the big baits. This is a mag draft, Megabass mag draft, 6-inch, 8-inch. This is the time of year when this bait shines for me. I blast fish on them February, March, April, May, beginning of June. April is the center of this bite. There are giant fish moving up for the spawn. Those fish can be caught on big baits. I have done so well the last couple years on these bigger paddle tails. I spend a ton of time with the 8-inch, but when I go to highland reservoirs, lakes that have a lot of smallmouth or spotted bass, I immediately drop to the 6. Now, sometimes I go back to an 8. If I'm catching a ton of fish, I'll try the 8, but I go back and forth between them. But these are fantastic baits, and these are my 2 colors. Albino pearl shad, whiteback shad. I love to skip with these things. One thing, so the hook is held in by a magnet, okay? If you're skipping under docks, it'll tend to pull it out. I've seen 50 different rigs of tricks guys use to try and keep that hook in there. I'm gonna show you the simplest thing in the world, okay? Because I love skipping with this bait. It has a hook slot in the belly, okay? So normally you just take that, you slide it in the hook slot, it sticks to the magnet and you're done. And that works great in open water. If I'm going to skip docks, I don't know why everybody tries all these complicated things. All I do, see in that hook slot, I take my hook point and I move it 1 millimeter left or right, and I stab it in the plastic inside of that hook slot, and it will not come out when you go skipping. It'll stay in there perfectly. I just move it to the side, stab it in the plastic. Now it's not just sitting in the hook slot, it's stabbed into the wall of the hook slot. Done. That's all there is to it. I don't know why people do these complicated riggings. That's all it takes, and I skip docks with these baits a ton, and it works. Don't be afraid to try that bigger bait this time of year. You'll be shocked that, 1, it works. It will catch giants, and it will also catch a lot of smaller fish too, especially in that smaller size. But this is the time of year where I have the most confidence in throwing that mag draft. I love doing it. Again, April is an amazing time to be on the water. You can catch fish on almost anything, but these are key baits that I trust every single day that I'm out. And if you get on Tim's boat, it's almost identical. We fish very similar styles this time of year. These are the baits that we use, and there's little nuances with each one, and I wanted to try and explain that so you would understand, because you can grab 100 different square bills. There's a reason I grab these. These are the nuances. If one of those jives with where you fish, try it. Hopefully this helps you guys. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.